Hello everyone. Last week we started with our discussion on Joseph Andrews and I introduced you to the novel and the first chapters we talked about. As far as I remember, it was just the first chapter, but I tried to highlight the main ideas in it and how as a work of quite satirical in tone and as a form what Fielding himself labels as a comic epic in prose. We have been introduced to our character Joseph Andrews, why he is actually writing that book on him was given in the first chapter. Today I will draw your attention to his background, where he comes from, why our writer prefers to write on him, and certain affairs that he will be involved in, especially with Lady Booby herself after Sir Thomas Booby's death. This is my version of the book, Joseph Andrews' Dover Thrift edition, but it has Wordsworth edition and Penguin edition as well, and we are following the novel from an online book, Gutenberg's Project Gutenberg's website. It's possible to have access to the book either through reading it online or just downloading a proper copy for yourselves. And getting a hard copy is always a good idea because, as you can see, it's full of notes, full of underlyings here, highlights and everything, and I cannot let that book go. It is full of the notes that I have taken so far after reading and rereading the novel for my own studies and for my own lectures. Alright, I hope you have somehow developed a certain interest in this character, Joseph Andrews, because we will be talking more about him in each chapter that each book provides for us. I told you that we have now the easy access of the story book by book, and each book is given in chapters. It's in 4 books, and each book has many chapters in it, and the title of the each chapter, I mean after the chapter title, we have a sentence explaining what it is about. Actually, you can see here. Oops. All right, you can see here that each book, each chapter in each book has one sentence introducing us to the story. And the one that we started with was of lives in general, and particularly of Pamela, with a word, by the by, of Colley Cibber and others. We also talked about Colley Cibber and how his own book was a so-called inspiration for him to write this particular novel. But he was being satirical, and we talked about it. He was criticizing Cibber at the time. Let's continue with the second chapter of our book. It's here. Yes, the second chapter of Mr. Joseph Andrews, his birth, parentage, education, and great endowments, with a word or two concerning ancestors. Our hero, as he also calls the hero of our ensuing history, Mr. Joseph Andrews, was esteemed to be the only son of Ghaffar and Gomer Andrews, and brother to the illustrious Pamela, whose virtue is at present so famous. As to his ancestors, we have searched with great diligence, but with little success, being unable to trace them farther than his great-grandfather, who, as an elderly person in the parish, remembers to have heard his father say was an excellent cudgel player. Whether he had any ancestors before this, we must leave to the opinion of our curious reader, finding nothing of sufficient certainty to rely on. However, we cannot omit inserting an epitaph which an ingenious friend of ours had communicated. This is the epitaph that he is giving us here, that "Stay, traveller, for underneath this pew lies fast asleep that merryman Andrew. When the last day's great sun shall gild the skies, then he shall from his tomb get up and rise. Be merry, while thou canst, for surely thou shalt shortly be as sad as he is now." The words are almost out of the stone with antiquity, but it is needless to observe that Andrew here is writ without an S, and is besides a Christian name. My friend, however, conjectures this to have been the founder of that sect of laughing philosophers since called Merry Andrews. Here he tries to search for the origins of Joseph Andrews, and he says that we can only go back to that epitaph written on the tomb, and he says it's not so much seen because it is so old dated, but it says, as far as I can tell, it's not Andrews but Andrew. He might have, because of the philosophy that is written here, that make your time, be merry while you can. He associates that ancestor of Joseph Andrews with that laughing philosophers since called Merry Andrews, he says. You can see the manner that he introduces his character, trying to find an ancestor to that character, trying to read him like a nobleman, because we said that it's a comic epic. In prose, in epics, we have noble figures who are exalted for their virtues, who are given or presented with their lineage, with their parents, with their achievements. And here, what he is doing is showing that an ordinary man, just a simple, good-hearted fellow, a virtuous fellow like Joseph Andrews, is his subject here. That is his protagonist. That is someone whom he wants to exalt in this epic. In this chapter, he searches for the ancestors of our protagonist, and he says the only thing that we could find about him is that at the age of 10, he became an apprentice to Sir Thomas Booby, an uncle of Mr. Booby's by the father's side, and now he is employed there as their apprentice. His office was to perform the part the ancients assigned to the god Priapus, which deity the moderns call by the name of Jack-o'-lantern, but his voice being so extremely musical that it rather allured the birds than terrified them. He was soon transplanted from the fields into the dog kennel, where he was placed under the huntsman and made what the sportsmen term whipper in. For this place, likewise, the sweetness of his voice disqualified him, the dogs preferring the melody of his chiding to all alluring notes to the huntsman, who soon became so incensed at it that he desired Sir Thomas to provide otherwise for him, and constantly laid every fault the dogs were at to the account of the poor boy, who was now transplanted to the stable. We see he is transferred from one job to another. He worked basically like Jack of Lantern, like a scarce crow that he used to scare the crows out of the field. But he had such a melodious voice that he used to tune out some melodies that the birds were attracted to him. And later on, he was put by the dogs. And again, whatever he did, because of his good melodic voice, he was not good there too. And he was transferred to the stable to guide the horses. Here he soon gave proofs of strength and agility beyond his years, and constantly rode the most spirited and vicious horses to water, and with an intrepidity which surprised everyone. While he was in this station, he rode several races for Sir Thomas, and this with such expertness and success that the neighboring gentlemen frequently solicited the knight to permit the little Joey, for he was called Little Joey, our Joseph, to ride then by the horse himself, especially after he had scornfully refused a considerable bribe to play booty on such an occasion. This extremely raised his character, and so pleased the Lady Booby, and that she desired to have him, being now 17 years of age, for her own footboy. Finally, he was promoted as the footboy to Lady Booby. But you should notice the details that he talks about the age of 17. Now we have a character who is reaching his puberty and then attracting the attention of the lady of the house. Just like Pamela's case, we have a similar case here going on with her brother Joseph. He draws attention of the lady of the house, and he becomes the footman for the lady. In the next chapter, we are introduced to our other character, which will be quite important for us in the story, because they will be traveling together, they will be experiencing certain adventures together. This is Mr. Abraham Adams and the Great, and Mrs. Slipslop, the chambermaid, is another character we are introduced in this particular chapter. And let me check if I have a note to add to that. First, let's read about Mr. Abraham Adams's character, because this is one of the innovative ones that Fielding introduces to us. Mr. Abraham Adams was an excellent scholar. He was a perfect master of the Greek and Latin languages, to which he added a great share of knowledge in the Oriental tongues, and could read and translate French, Italian, and Spanish. He had applied many years to the most severe study, and had treasured up a fund of learning rarely to be met with in a university. He was besides a man of good sense, good parts, and good nature, but was at the same time as entirely ignorant of the ways of this world as an infant just entered into it could possibly be. As he had never any intention to deceive, so he never suspected such a design in others. He was generous, friendly, brave to an excess, but simplicity was his characteristic. He did no more than Mr. Colisiber, apprehend any such passions as malice and envy to exist in mankind, which was indeed less remarkable in a country parson than in a gentleman who had passed his life behind the scenes, a place which had been seldom taught the school of innocence, and where a very little observation would have convinced the great apologist and those passions have a real existence in the human mind. His virtue and his other qualifications, as they rendered him equal to his office, so they made him an agreeable and valuable companion, and had so much endeared and well recommended him to a bishop at, and that at the age of 50 he was provided with a handsome income of £23 a year, which however he could not make any great figure with, because he lived in a dear country and was a little encumbered with a wife and 6 children. It was this gentleman who, having, as I have said, observed the singular devotion of young Andrews, had found means to question him concerning several particulars, as how many books there were in the New Testament, which were they, how many chapters they contained, and such like. To all which Mr. Adams privately said he answered much better than Sir Thomas and 2 other neighbouring justices of the peace could probably have done. Mr. Adams's character, his simplicity, his belief that every man has such a good nature as he did, and he also, the narrator also tells us that Mr. Abraham Adams is like an infant. Like an infant, he doesn't know about the ways of this world. He emphasizes all of that because when they travel around with Joseph, we will see they experience such difficulties because they don't expect people to behave in that manner. And the idea, their relation to one another shows us that Mr. Abraham Adams is quite interested in raising Joseph, teaching him Latin. And we are introduced here after a few paragraphs to Mrs. Slipslop. And Mrs. Slipslop, the maid, she talks to, he asks her to talk to the Sir of the house, Sir Booby, and say that he might be interested in teaching Latin to Joseph. And she says, what is he going to do with Latin? He's just a footman. He doesn't need that. You need Latin because it's your job, your profession. You need to know about it. You need to teach people that. But what on earth does a person like Joseph need to learn Latin? She cannot make sense out of that wish. Not only, I will also talk about that here, the part with Mrs. Slipslop, but before that, I would also like to reflect on Mr. Adams's thoughts about Joseph. He thinks that Joseph is an industrious boy. He is good at fulfilling any stuff that you might ask him to do. He is a naive character. He is enthusiastic about learning, and he wants to provide him with that opportunity of teaching him Latin. And Mrs. Slipslop says it's not possible. They won't let him go. They won't let Mrs. Lady Booby would not let him out of her sight. And they go to London, and young Andrews is never ever influenced by the atmosphere in London. People are drinking, gambling, they are enjoying their lives, but all that he is interested is listening to good music, and that's all. He's not entertaining himself. He's not entertaining himself with other things, with women, with drinking, or with gambling. But he is all into listening to good music. We could say that this is the part, or one of the parts that the narrator talks about how virtuous he is as a young man. And they are seen together, like Joseph is in having Lady Booby in his arm, this part. They are walking in the Hyde Park, the popular park in London, and Joey in her arm. Lady Booby is so proud of Joey. He likes Joseph very much. He likes his company a lot. You will see why, actually. And the two other women figures saw him at the park, walking, strolling like that. And the names, again, like Lady Booby or Mrs. Slip Slop, these names are like the suggestive names that we see in the 18th century drama, that the names are suggestive of the person's character. Lady Tittle and Lady Tattle, they came accidentally in their coach. Bless me, says Lady Tittle, can I believe my eyes? Is that Lady Booby? Surely, says Tattle, but what makes you surprised? Why, is not that her footman? Replied Tittle, at which Tattle laughed and cried, an old business, I assure you. Is it possible you should not have heard of it? The whole town had known it this half year. The consequence of this interview was a whisper through 100 visits, which were separately performed by the two ladies the same afternoon, and might have had a mischievous effect had it not been stopped by two fresh repetitions which were published the day afterwards and engrossed the whole talk of the town. But whatever opinion or suspicion the scandalous inclination of defamers might entertain of Lady Booby's innocent freedoms, it is certain they made no impression on young Andrews, who never offered to encroach beyond the liberties which his lady allowed him, a behavior which she imputed to the violent respect he preserved for her, and which served only to heighten a something she began to conceive, and which the next chapter will open a little farther. You see, the story provides us what's coming out in the next chapter. It keeps us reading what's going to happen in the next chapter. Mrs. Titter and Tatter, they are like, how could I say that? I wish we had a similar thing, but they are gossipers of the town. Let me say that. And the verbs titter and tatter is usually called for chit-chatting, gossiping. So these two ladies, they are like corresponding to one another. They are the sources of all the gossip in town. And here he says that they started this rumor, actually, the moment that Joseph started to serve as her footman. In chapter 5, Lady Booby loses her beloved husband, Sir Thomas Booby. And now she's a widow, and she wants to be consoled because of this terrible event. At this time, an accident happened which put a stop to those agreeable walks, which probably would have soon puffed up the cheeks of fame and caused her to blow her brazen trumpet through the town, and this was no other than the death of Sir Thomas Booby, who, departing this life, left his disconsolate lady confined to her house as closely as if she herself had been attacked by some violent disease. Before the death of Sir Thomas Booby, Lady Booby strolled in the town with Joseph. Actually, she wanted to give the impression that she's having an affair with Joseph, but as the narrator puts it very well, that he did not take any liberties because of that, but she kept enjoying this affair. After the loss of her husband, she only led Mrs. Slipslop to come in, three female friends who made a party at cards, and on the seventh day she ordered Joey, whom, for a good reason, we shall hereafter call Joseph, to bring up her tea kettle. Joey was the name that he was called as a boy, but now he says we are going to call him Joseph afterwards, because he's not a boy anymore. He's a young man that this lady is so interested in. The lady, being in bed, called Joseph to her, bade him sit down, and having accidentally laid her hand on his, she asked him if he had ever been in love. Joseph answered with some confusion. It was time enough for one so young as himself to think on such things. As young you are, replied the lady, I am convinced you are no stranger to that passion. Come, Joey, says she, tell me truly, who is the happy girl whose eyes have made a conquest of you? Joseph returned that all the women he had ever seen were equally indifferent to him. Oh, then, said the lady, you are a general lover. Indeed, you handsome fellows, like handsome women, are very long and difficult in fixing. But yet you shall never persuade me that your harden is so insatiable of affection. I rather impute what you say to your secrecy, a very commendable quality, and what I am far from being angry with you for. Nothing can be more unworthy in a young man than to betray any intimacies with the ladies. Ladies, madam, said Joseph, I am sure I never had the impudence to think of any that deserve that name. Don't pretend to too much modesty, said she, for that sometimes may be impertinent, but pray answer me this question. Suppose a lady should happen to like you, suppose she should prefer you to all your sex, and admit you to the same familiarities as you might have hoped for if you had been born her equal. Are you certain that no vanity could tempt you to discover her? Answer me honestly, Joseph. Have you so much more sense and so much more virtue than you handsome young fellows generally have, who make no scruple of sacrificing our dear reputation to our pride, without considering the great obligation we lay on you by our condescension and confidence? Can you keep a secret, my Joey? Just want to stop here for a moment and think about the scene. Imagine that, because in that way the dialogue would make more sense to you. that this widow, on her seventh day after losing her husband, calls for her footman, which is not quite possible because she's only been visited by 3 or 4 women. But she especially calls for him, and she asks about women, about love. She says, as a young person, you must be interested in women. If you are interested in them, are there anyone who is not in your equal class, but still you have developed certain affections for? She's actually trying to ask about herself, that if he is interested in her or not. But you can see the way that she builds up her argument is quite funny at that moment, and she accidentally drops her head on his hand, and this touch even is not appropriate because she is the lady and he is just at her service. You can see how Lady Booby abuses her status, just like Mr. B, Pamela's seducer. Always keep in mind the parallel story, okay? And she here asks, can you keep a secret, my Joey, madam, says he. I hope your ladyship contacts me with ever betraying the secrets of the family. I might have that character of you. He's still unaware of the situation, and he says, I always keep my promises, and why should I give your secrets away? He's more interested in these issues, actually. Poor Joseph, poor Joseph. And she continues here. I don't intend to turn you away, Joey, said she, and sighed. I'm afraid it is not in my power. She then raised herself a little in her bed and discovered one of the whitest necks that ever was seen, at which Joseph blushed. La, says she, in an affected surprise. What am I doing? I have trusted myself with a man alone, naked in bed. Suppose you should have any wicked intentions upon my honor. How should I defend myself? Joseph protested that he never had the least evil design against her. Of course, he doesn't have any evil designs, but she is tempting him. She's saying, oops, I'm so vulnerable right now. I'm naked, I'm in bed, and I'm with a man. What could go wrong, and why shouldn't it go wrong right now? Why is he resisting? This is what is in Lady Booby's mind as a seductress. No, says she, perhaps, let me finish this. Yeah, okay. No, says she, perhaps you may not call your designs wicked, but perhaps they are not so. He swore they were not. You misunderstand me, says she. I mean, if they were against my honor, they may not be wicked, but the world calls them so. But then, say you, the world will never know anything of the matter. Yet, would you not be trusting to your secrecy? Must not my reputation be then in your power? Would you not then be my master? Here she appeals to Joseph's argumentative mind, let me say, and she says, imagine that we did that and it is labeled by the world as wicked, but if we don't say anything about it, then no one will know and no one will claim it to be wicked. And since I will trust you, you will become my master. There will be no inequalities between us anymore. Joseph begged her ladyship to be comforted, for that he would never imagine the least wicked thing against her, and that he had rather die 1,000 deaths than give her any reason to suspect him. "Yes," said she, "I must have reason to suspect you. Are you not a man? And without vanity I may pretend to some charms, but perhaps you may fear I should prosecute you. Indeed, I hope you do, and yet heaven knows I should never have the confidence to appear before a court of justice. And you know, Joey, I'm of a forgiving temper. Tell me, Joey, don't you think I should forgive you?" "Indeed, madam," says Joseph, "I will never do anything to disoblige your ladyship." "How," says she, "do you think it would not disoblige me then? Do you think I would willingly suffer you?" "I don't understand you, madam," says Joseph. "Don't you?" said she. "Then you are either a fool or pretend to be so. I find I was mistaken in you. So get you downstairs and never let me see your face again. Your pretended innocence cannot impose on me." "Madam," says Joseph, "I would not have your ladyship think any evil of me. I have always endeavored to be a dutiful servant, both to you and my master." "Oh, do, villain," answered my lady. "Why didst you mention the name of that dear man, unless to torment me, to bring his precious memory to my mind?" And then she burst into a fit of tears. "Get thee from my sight! I shall never endure thee more." At which words she turned away from him, and Joseph retreated from the room in a most disconsolate condition. Read that letter, which the reader will find in the next chapter. I'm here trying to a little bit dramatize the event for you, because in that manner it is more fun and more, I think, understandable for you. You should imagine the scene with its lively dialogue, how she tries to seduce this young man, but he is so indifferent to what she is suggesting. And then she, in a way, talks openly about it. She wants to rationalize the thing, that she says it's okay, we can do it, we can be together. But our poor Joseph is all about his duties. He promises secrecy to her because this is family business, he thinks. And later on, he doesn't want to disoblige to what she wants, but he doesn't understand totally what she's asking for. And at the end, she gets so frustrated at her attempt that she thinks that he should go away instantly, and she just fires him out of the room by faking a burst of tears because of her again remembering about her husband. But actually, as you would gather, that she is shedding tears for being rejected by Joseph himself. And what happens? Our sweet Pamela's brother writes a letter to Pamela after that event. How Joseph Andrews wrote a letter to his sister Pamela is the chapter 6. To Mrs. Pamela Andrews, living with Squire Bobby. Dear sister, since I received your letter of your good lady's death, you can see how he relates the two stories, that Pamela's landlady died. Remember that the first thing that we know about Pamela was that she was writing to her parents, informing them about this death, and informing that how afterwards the landlord, Mr. B, was quite affectionate towards her, fond of her, giving away some stuff to her. And here at that point, Harry Fielding relates connects the two stories. It's not a parallelism anymore, but there is a connection that these two fictional characters are connected through their stories, and Joseph writing a letter to Pamela. Let's read the letter. Dear sister, since I received your letter of your good lady's death, we have had a misfortune of the same kind in our family. My worthy master, Sir Thomas, died about 4 days ago, and what is worse, my poor lady is certainly gone distracted. None of the servants expected her to take it so to heart, because they quarrelled almost every day of their lives. But no more of that, because you know, Pamela, I never loved to tell the secrets of my master's family, but to be sure you must have known they never loved one another. And I have heard her ladyship wish his honour dead about 1,000 times, but nobody knows what it is to lose a friend till they have lost him. Don't tell anybody that I write, because I should not care to have folks say I discover what passes in our family, but if it had not been so great a lady, I should have thought she had had a mind to me. Dear Pamela, don't tell anybody, but she ordered me to sit down by her bedside when she was naked in bed, and she held my hand and talked exactly as a lady does to her sweetheart in a stage play, which I have seen in Covent Garden, while she wanted him to be no better than he should be. If madam be mad, I shall not care for staying long in the family, so I heartily wish you could get me a place, either at the squire's or some other neighbouring gentleman's, unless it be true that you are going to be married to Parson Williams, as folks talk, and then I should be very willing to be his clerk, for which you know I am qualified, being able to read and to set a psalm. I fancy I shall be discharged very soon, and at the moment I am, unless I hear from you, I shall return to my old master's country seat, if it be only to see Parson Adams, who is the best man in the world. London is a bad place, and there is so little good fellowship that the next door neighbours don't know one another. Pray give me service Give my service to all friends that inquire for me. So I rest, your loving brother, Joseph Andrews. We see now that Joseph was not totally understanding what was going on, but he was not totally missing the point. Let me say that's better. Missing the points, the hints that his lady were throwing at him, because he says, I have seen that at stage. He is so inexperienced that he could only refer to a stage play about such physical relationship with women. And she says he might be mad. At any case, I might be fired right now. And he wonders if Pamela would help him to get a job for himself. And in this case, she's not married to Mr. B, but Williams, as he says here, Parson Williams, in that story. And what happens after the letter, he wrote the letter, we have another attempt on him, on his virtue. This time by Mrs. Slipslop. Here the narrator introduces more about Mrs. Slipslop. He says, let's make reader a little bit more acquainted with that character. She was a maiden gentlewoman of about 45 years of age, who, having made a small slip in her youth, had continued a good maid ever since. She was not at the same time remarkably handsome, being very short and rather too corpulent in body and somewhat red, with the addition of pimples in the face. Her nose was likewise rather too large, and her eyes too little, nor did she resemble a cow so much in her breed as in two brown globes which she carried before her. One of her legs was also a little shorter than the other, which occasioned her to limp as she walked. This fair creature had long cast the eyes of affection on Joseph, in which she had not met with quite so good success as she probably wished, though besides the allurements of her native charms, and she had given him tea, sweetmeats, wine, and many other delicacies, of which, by keeping the keys, she had the absolute command. The description of Mrs. Lipslop is quite caricaturized, as you can see, that the details of her face are exaggerated, and he calls him this fair creature. She's not fair at all, as the descriptions prove it. But the way that this caricaturized figure, who is not married but who had her slip in her youth, still having her eyes on Joseph, trying to seduce him this time. Here she says she offers him some drink and some biscuits. She says, "Sure, nothing can be more simple contract in a woman than to place her affections on a boy. If I had ever thought it would have been my fate, I should have wished to die 1,000 deaths rather than to live to see that day. If we like a man, the lightest hint sophisticates, whereas a boy proposes upon us to break through all the regulations of modesty before we can make any oppression on him." Joseph, who did not understand a word she said, answered, "Yes, madam," replied Mrs. Lipslop with some warmth. "Do you intend to result my passion? Is it not enough, ungrateful as you are, to make no return to all the favors I have done you, but you must treat me with irony? Barbarous monster! How have I deserved that my passion should be resulted and treated with irony?" "Madam," answered Joseph, "I don't understand your hard words, but I am certain you have no occasion to call me ungrateful, for so far from intending you any wrong, I have always loved you as well as if you had been my own mother." This is the bomb that he's throwing at her. "I have always thought you like my mother." How? She is enraged. "Your own mother? Do you insinuate what I'm old enough to be your mother? I don't know what a stripling may think, but I believe a man would refer to me any green sickness silly girl, whatsoever. But I thought I ought to despise you rather than be angry with you for referring the conversation of girls to that of a woman of sense." "Madam," says Joseph, "I'm sure I always valued the honor you did me by your conversation, for I know you are a woman of learning." "Yes, but Joseph," said she, a little softened by the compliment to her learning, "if you had a value for me, you certainly would have found some method of showing it to me, for I'm convicted you must see the value I have for you." "Yes, Joseph, my eyes, whether I would or no, must have declared a passion I cannot conquer. Oh, Joseph!" And she is described as a hungry tigress, like an animal, she jumps on Joseph. As when a hungry tigress who had long traversed the woods in fruitless search sees within the reach of her claws a lamb, she prepares to leap on her prey, or as a voracious pike of immense size surveys through the liquid element a roach or gudgeon which cannot escape her jaws, opens them wide and to swallow the little fish, so that Mrs. Slipslop prepared to lay her violent, amorous hands on the poor Joseph. When luckily her mistress's bell rung and delivered the intended martyr from her clutches, she was obliged to leave him abruptly and to defer the execution of her purpose till some other time. We shall therefore return to the Lady Booby and give our reader some account of her behavior after she was left by Joseph in a temper of mind not greatly different from that of the inflamed Slipslop. This chapter, after this caricaturesque, again, grotesque descriptions of how Lady Booby, how Mrs. Slipslop wanted to approach poor Joseph. Joseph is saved by the ring of the bell, and in the next chapter, Lady Booby wants to make her mind about Joseph. She calms herself and she wants to talk to him once more. That is to say that she wanted to try again. So I will pass chapter 7 and continue with chapter 8. This is a picture provided for us, a drawing of Joseph and Lady Booby. Yes, in this chapter it says, in which after some very fine writing the history goes on and relates the interview between the lady and Joseph, where the latter had set an example which we despair of seeing followed by his sex in this vicious age. Here I would like to Yes, this is how Joseph Andrews described for us at this age. Now he is 21. He was of the highest degree of middle stature. His limbs were put together with great elegance and no less strength. His legs and thighs were formed in the exactest proportion. His shoulders were broad and brawny, but yet his arm hung so easily, and he had all the symptoms of strength without the least clumsiness. His hair was of a nut brown color, was displayed in wanton ringlets down his back. His forehead was high, his eyes dark, and as full of sweetness of fire as of fire, his nose a little inclined to the Roman, his teeth white and even, his lips full red and soft. His beard was only rough on his chin and upper lip, but his cheeks in his blood glowed were overspread with a thick down. His countenance had a tenderness joined with a sensibility inexpressible, and this the most perfect neatness in his dress, and an air which to those who have not seen many noblemen would give an idea of nobility. Now, whom could you think of similar qualities with Joseph? I will now take your attention to that. Very much like his sister, Pamela Andrews, Joseph Andrews here is described as a person who gives an idea of nobility, although he's not coming from one. It was, I think, Mrs. Jervis who talked about Pamela's being such a noble character, although she didn't get the education in the same manner that Joseph Andrews is provided here. And the second attempt comes after Competitor Joseph, that part. I think I will read like that and try to dramatize it for you. She says, "Come hither, Joseph. Another mistress might discard you for these offences. But I have compassion for your youth, and if I could be certain you would be no more guilty. Consider, child," laying her hand carelessly upon his, "you are a handsome young fellow, and might do better. You might make your fortune." "Madam," said Joseph, "I do assure your ladyship I don't know whether any maid in the house is a man or woman." "Oh, fie, Joseph," answered the lady. "Don't commit another crime in denying the truth. I could pardon the first, but I hate a liar." "Madam," cries Joseph, "I hope your ladyship will not be offended at my asserting my innocence, for by all that is sacred, I have never offered more than kissing." "Kissing?" said the lady, with great discomposure of countenance and more redness in her cheeks than anger in her eyes. "Do you call that no crime? Kissing, Joseph, is a prologue to a play. Can I believe a young fellow of your age and complexion will be content with kissing? No, Joseph, there is no woman who grants that, but will grant more, and I am deceived greatly in you if you would not put her closely to it. What would you think, Joseph, if I admitted you to kiss me?" Joseph replied he would sooner die than have any such thought. "And yet, Joseph," returned she, "ladies have admitted their footmen to such familiarities." I have such difficulty to pronouncing that word. Familiarities, and footmen, I confess to you, much less deserving them, fellows without half your charms, for such might almost excuse the crime. Tell me, therefore, Joseph, if I should admit you to such freedom, what would you think of me? Tell me freely." "Madam," said Joseph, "I should think your ladyship condescended a great deal below yourself." "Pah!" said she, "that I am to answer to myself. But would you not insist on more? Would you be contented with a kiss? Would not your inclinations be all on fire rather by such a favor?" "Madam," said Joseph, "if they were, I hope I should be able to control them, without suffering them to get the better of my virtue. You have heard, reader, poets talk of the statue of surprise. You have heard likewise, or else you have heard very little, how surprise made one of the sons of Croesus speak, though he was dumb. You have seen the faces in the 18-penny gallery, when through the trapdoor to soft or no music, Mr. Bridgewater, Mr. William Mills, or some other ghostly appearance had ascended with a face all pale with powder and shirt bloody and with ribbons, and but from none of these, nor from Phidias or Praxiteles, if they should return to life, no, not from the inimitable pencil of my friend Hogarth, could you receive such an idea of surprise as would have entered in at your eyes had beheld the lady booby when those last words issued out of the lips of Joseph. Here, again, Fielding makes his references to the contemporary plays, and she says this element of surprise was never ever achieved by any dramatist before, and you see that on Lady Booby's face, because he again said no to her. And to her surprise, big surprise. "And your virtue?" she says. After recovering after a silence of 2 minutes, "I shall never survive it." "Your virtue?" "Intolerable confidence. Have you the assurance to pretend that when a lady demeans herself to throw aside the rules of decency in order to honor you with the highest favor in her power, your virtue should resist her inclination? That when she had conquered her own virtue, she should find an obstruction in yours?" "Madam," said Joseph, "I cannot see why her having no virtue should be a reason against my having any, or why, because I'm a man, or because I'm poor, my virtue must be subservient to her pleasures." "I'm out of patience," cries the lady. "Did ever mortal hear of a man's virtue? Did ever the greatest or the greatest man pretend to have any of this kind? Will magistrates who punish lewdness or parsons who preach against it make any scruple of commuting it? And can a boy, a stripling, have the confidence to talk of his virtue?" And here is the hit. The hit is coming. The hit is coming here. You see, she reflects the ideas of the 18th century society's morality. What are you talking about, she says. Is it ever possible to talk about a male virtue in this world? Come on, she says. Even those who preach it do not practice it. And stop, she says. I don't want to hear about it. You're just pretending to it. She doesn't believe him, and she's shocked. But here comes the hit. He says, "Madam, that boy is the brother of Pamela, and would be ashamed that the chastity of his family, which is preserved in her, should be stained in him. If there are such men as your ladyship mentions, I'm sorry for it. But I wish they had an opportunity of reading over those letters which my father had sent me of my sister Pamela's. Nor do I doubt but such an example would amend them." You see, no, that we talked about, I wanted to say, we talked about how Pamela's letters were intended to be written for the morality of women in that era. This is how Fielding makes fun of the way these letters functioned in the society, or were supposed to function in the society. He makes a very good satirical scene out of it. He not only rejects here Lady Booby's offer to kiss her, but at the same time he gives this moral lesson that he says virtue or morality should be in both sexes in our family. Pamela kept her virtue, and I am responsible for that, for our family. And she says, "You impudent villain, do you insult me with the follies of my relation who had exposed himself all over the country upon your sister's account, a little vixen, whom I have always wondered my late Lady Booby ever kept in her house? Get out of my sight now, and prepare to set out this night, or I will order you your wages immediately, and you shall be stripped and turned away." "Madam," says Joseph, "I'm sorry I have offended your ladyship. I'm sure I never intended it." "Yes, you did," cries she. "You have had the vanity to misconstrue the little innocent freedom I took, in order to try whether what I had heard was true. Oh, my conscience! You have had the assurance to imagine I was fond of you myself." Joseph answered, he had only spoke out of tenderness for his virtue, at which words she flew into a violent passion, and refusing to hear more, and ordered him instantly to leave the room. Alright, I think it is time to stop here. We will continue with more of Joseph's case next week and his journey with Parson Adams and what they go through and how he preserves his virtue and what happens, how he keeps this good-hearted, simple fellow nature in the following chapters. But this is an important step that he took, or maybe he didn't take, and showed the most related part to Pamela's case actually for us. How he was tried to be seduced and how he rejected it, claiming that he is the brother of Pamela Andrews. Never ever does such things. Alright, I hope you are keeping up with your reading of the novel. I'm planning to finish it for next week. If not, we still have, I think, do we have 2 weeks or 3 weeks? Again, I'm confused at the end of this tiring video shooting day, but I will arrange it. If I can finish it next week, we will finish it and continue with the Castle of Otranto. But the Castle of Otranto does not require us for more than 1 week. So if not, and if we have another week, we will fulfill our purpose of discussing Castle of Otranto in 1 week. After that, start reading the Castle of Otranto, which will not take you more than 1 or 2 days, I believe. Alright, thank you for watching this video. We will meet in the next one. Bye-bye.